I purchased a stunning piece of land that came with its own small private lake. I was thrilled, already imagining the dream home I would build there. One of the most fascinating features of the property was an old, historic dam that controlled the lake's water level. It wasn't automated or modern. It was a manually operated structure, something out of another era. To me, it felt special. I loved the idea of being responsible for maintaining it and protecting that little piece of history. For a while, everything about the property felt perfect, but that peace didn't last long. Trouble began when the Homeowners Association from a nearby upscale development decided they had a claim to part of my land. A tiny corner of my lake happened to touch the boundary of their property, and apparently that was all the encouragement they needed. Before long, they started construction on what they described as a private access road along the edge of the water. But this wasn't some harmless path on their side of the property line. It was a gravel road meant for golf carts, and they were building it directly on my land. I tried to handle the situation calmly at first. I approached them, showed them my official property survey, and pointed out exactly where my ownership extended. The documents clearly showed the shoreline, and the land where they were working belonged to me. I followed up with emails, phone calls, and even attended one of their HOA board meetings hoping to resolve things peacefully. Their response was unbelievably arrogant. I received a smug letter from their attorney claiming they had a prescriptive easement and instructed me to stop interfering with what they called a community improvement project. In other words, they were building a shortcut across my property without permission and basically daring me to challenge them. I understood immediately that a legal fight could drag on for years and cost a fortune. It was a classic strategy of wearing someone down through endless legal bills. Their HOA had plenty of money behind it, while I was just one property owner trying to defend my land. Standing there beside my lake one afternoon, watching their construction crew flatten parts of my shoreline, I felt completely powerless. That's when my eyes drifted toward the old dam. Slowly, an idea began forming in my mind. The dam might have been old, but it still worked perfectly. More importantly, it was entirely and unquestionably located on my property. The HOA might believe they could put a road wherever they wanted, but there was one thing they couldn't control: the water itself. That realization sparked a plan. It was simple, perfectly legal, and relied on their own arrogance. I walked down to the dam, grabbed a heavy iron wrench used to operate it, and began turning the wheel that controlled the main gate. Each turn required effort, but with every rotation, I felt a growing sense of satisfaction. Over the next several days, I kept the main gate mostly closed, opening it only slightly to maintain a healthy flow for the ecosystem. Slowly but steadily, the lake's water level began to rise. At first, the change was barely noticeable, just an inch here and there, then another inch. The HOA didn't seem to notice at all. They were too busy celebrating their brand-new golf cart road. Residents from the development began using it regularly, cruising along the lakeside in their carts and enjoying what they believed was their scenic shortcut. I would watch from my window as they drove past, quietly waiting. Then the spring rains arrived, and that's when things really started to change. The rainfall that season was heavier than usual. Combined with a partially closed dam gate, the water level began rising much faster. Before long, the lake started creeping beyond its usual banks. The first thing it reached was their precious gravel road. At first, it simply turned the path into a muddy mess. Golf carts began getting stuck in the wet gravel and soaked ground. A couple of irritated phone calls came my way, but I calmly ignored them. After all, I was simply operating the dam on my own property. But the water didn't stop there. Day by day, the lake continued rising. Soon the so-called private road wasn't much of a road anymore. Large sections disappeared beneath the water. Eventually, the entire gravel path was submerged. What had once been their proud golf cart route became part of the lakebed itself. Fish like bass and sunfish began swimming over the spot where their carts had rolled just days before. Nature was quietly reclaiming the land. The HOA quickly went from confident to panicked. I started receiving angry letters accusing me of causing property damage and threatening lawsuits. The irony was almost unbelievable. They had damaged my shoreline first, yet now they were furious that my lake was swallowing their illegal road. Soon their lawyers sent a formal cease and desist letter demanding that I immediately lower the water level. My attorney responded with a short and very straightforward message. It explained that I was operating my dam on my property completely within my legal rights. If their road happened to be flooded, perhaps they shouldn't have built it on what was effectively the bottom of a lake. Along with that reply, we sent them a bill for the cost of the property survey and the damage their construction had done to my shoreline. We also included an official notice of trespassing. That's when they realized the trap they were in. If they actually tried to sue me, they would have to stand in court and admit that they knowingly built a road on land they didn't own. The situation quickly turned into a joke throughout the wider community. Word spread about the HOA that had somehow managed to build a road underwater. Their fancy neighborhood suddenly became known for having an amphibious golf cart path. Even their own residents began turning against the HOA board. People started asking why they were paying such high association fees just to fund a legal battle the board couldn't win. On top of that, the board had wasted money building a road that was now nothing more than fish habitat. The whole situation was a disaster, and it was entirely their fault. Eventually, the HOA president called me personally. The confidence and smug attitude he'd shown before were completely gone. He sounded exhausted and defeated. After a long pause, he asked what it would take for me to lower the water level. I told him my conditions were very simple. First, I wanted a formal written apology acknowledging the trespassing and the harassment from their lawyers. Second, they would pay the full cost to restore my shoreline to its original condition. And third, they would sign a legally binding agreement recognizing my property boundaries and promising never to build anything on my land again. He wasn't happy about it, but he didn't have any real choice. A few weeks later, I had everything in my hands: the written apology, a check covering the restoration work, and the signed legal agreement. Once those conditions were met, I kept my word. I went back down to the dam and slowly began opening the gate again. Over the following month, the water level gradually returned to normal. Eventually, the gravel road reappeared from beneath the lake, but it was completely ruined. The once smooth path was now a washed-out, rutted strip of useless gravel. The HOA never attempted to rebuild it. Even today, it still sits there as a quiet reminder of their arrogance. Sometimes you don't need expensive lawyers or shouting matches to solve a problem. Sometimes all it takes is patience, a clear understanding of your rights, and in my case, a private dam. They wanted to fight, but instead, I let the lake do the talking. In the end, I got my peace and quiet back, and the HOA learned a very wet lesson about respecting property lines. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, be sure to like and subscribe for more.